Welcome back to the Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny, the only NFL podcast. One of the hosts skipped minicamp because he identifies as a medium-sized dog. That's Lenny. I'm Mina Kimes. He's more of a smedium, but don't tell him that. A man joining me today, not really a smedium, Mike Golic Jr. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. Yes, I was reminded of that. I got to throw out one of the first pitches before an Angels game last week, not like the main one, but they had Hawaiian shirt jersey giveaway night. And let me tell you, that is one size fits many, not one size fits all. That thing was hurting when I threw it on.
That explains something, which is I went to the Mariners were playing the Angels on Sunday, and there were so many people in Hawaiian shirts, and I was wondering where they all got them. I guess it must have happened at this Hawaiian shirt night. You threw it from the mound, though. Looked like a good pitch. So
yeah, let me tell you, needed to just keep it out of the dirt to avoid all the jackals in my family from giving me grief. So tried to make everyone proud.
I'm so excited to have you today. This is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk about a few different things. We are going to talk about probably the biggest NFL news of the last week or so, which is Aaron Rodgers finally putting a ring on it with the Pittsburgh Steelers, if we can call that. It's a year. But we're going to more broadly each pick some off-season winners, basically teams, players, coaches, concepts that we feel came out on top in some way this offseason or maybe got better. We're also going to do something I've never done, but I kind of just came up with off the top of my dome a couple weeks ago, which is we're going to draft future head coaches. And this is kind of a way for us to talk about some of the hot coordinators in the league. So, maybe if you're a team who doesn't have the best prospects this season, you can listen and think about who might be calling plays for you next year. I don't know if anyone is that hopeless already at this point in the offseason. But before we get started, I do want to make a quick announcement, which is you have a new home. Can you let folks know where to find your show with your dad?
Yes, Golic and Golic now moving to the afternoons. You can check us out over on FanDuel Sports Network if you're in a market that has that. We're certainly exploring other avenues as we grow here. But afternoons now. So a full night's sleep for me, which is fine. But for my dad, who's spent basically the entirety of his 2 to 3 decades in sports media and mornings, this is the first time he's ever not had an alarm set at 4:20 for a show. So very excited for that. Check us out. Fun week of guests. Mina, we will be bothering you very shortly here now that we have more favorable West Coast hours to try and come on.
Absolutely. Anytime. Very excited about that. So my first pick, I'm just going to jump right into this for winners, is a little bit, I don't know what the word is, snarky, I guess. But it's kind of how I'm looking at the lens of this, or the lens through which I'm looking at this Aaron Rodgers news. My winner is the Cleveland Browns fans who want the best quarterback in the draft next year. And it's a backhanded way of saying, I think the Steelers are once again going to be too good to be picking near the top of the draft. Obviously, though, they have all this draft cap. Steelers fans, if you're at home screaming, yes, I know you guys have a lot of picks. I know you can maneuver. However, I pretty firmly believe you're going to be better than the Cleveland Browns, who also, by the way, did the big Travis Hunter trade. So they have picks as well. It's hard for me to imagine a world in which the Browns aren't better situated to go after a quarterback next year. Now that we got that out of the way, that is my way of getting to my feelings, I guess, about this signing, which is I think there's a possibility that the offense will be better than last year. I think it's unlikely that it's going to be better to the point where they can go further in the playoffs or make a difference beyond what we've seen from the Steelers the last few years.
Yeah, it is. And I think this was kind of the framework that I had it with all offseason, and most people did, which is we understood for Pittsburgh, it's the only move on the table if your goal is to be competitive. Like Mason Rudolph, I don't know how you'd be able to, I guess you, for some people in the fan base, could sell that as an option, but
he's a big, handsome, strong. What did the Trump say about Mason Rudolph?
Oh, yeah.
I think he called him handsome with a great arm. Anyway, sorry.
Big, handsome, strong boy, the big, beautiful quarterback.
No chance.
But no,
No
so like I get it from that lens, but you're right. Like from where the Steelers have been, it's sort of in a weird way, kind of like where the Saints have always been, where the Saints refuse to ever acknowledge the idea that
Mhm.
like rebuilding is possible, but they do it continuing to spend. The Steelers do it because Mike Tomlin is such a good coach. He's only going to allow them to really fall below such a level, but they still have never really had a good answer for the quarterback question post Roethlisberger.
I think with the Steelers, it is there are some similarities with the Saints. It's a little bit less objectionable because they're not, like, making massive financial commitments. I mean,
Right.
let's start here. This is a one-year deal, somewhere between 10 and $15 million, a totally reasonable price to pay for Aaron Rodgers at this point in his career. We'll talk a little bit about what he brings to the table in a second. So it's not like they're mortgaging their future. So I do want to give the Steelers at least some credit. Like they're not, you know what I mean? Like they're not they're holding on to the possibility of drafting a quarterback. The problem is, again, I just think they're going to be too good. The defense is still good. The defense, but TJ Watt's holding out. I'm sure they'll figure
Sure.
that out. Uh, I by the way, I love that. I just don't acknowledge any of these like holdouts or training camps or mini camp stuff. I don't even. I
It's
don't.
fun. It's fun fodder for those of us with a daily show who have to try and make everything seem big and important. But it is really hard because you feel like you're faking the funk so much because it's like they're going to get it done. Most of these guys are too
Yeah,
good.
right.
The one really interesting one has been Trey Hendrickson just
Yeah,
because of how the Bengals have structured their offseason and how bad their defense was last
totally.
year. But
The
no, I
leverage
mean,
is a little different. Yeah.
yeah, but no, to go back to your point, like the Steelers make it a really high degree of difficulty to go and try and prioritize their future because to your point, they are so competent in so many ways that other teams would kill for, but it's about the standard around there not being met for so long. And yes, Aaron Rodgers coming in will, to your point, not break the bank, but they did that last year too. Like you did it with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, where
Yeah.
you got two quarterbacks out of the bargain bin. We all acknowledged it was fiscally responsible, but upside wise, and then especially in that division, where is the real
That's
hope for
tricky.
anything that's a ceiling breaker? And Aaron Rodgers, even if you get, let's say, the end of last season and you can draft that into more post Achilles injury with more time, it still doesn't feel like a season that touches Burrow, Jackson, and the rest of the division that matters.
Let's talk about the end of last season and who Aaron Rodgers is as a quarterback in 2025. Um, statistically pretty awful, near the bottom of the NFL and completion percentage over expected, QBR, whatnot. But I think people have correctly noted that as the year went on, he did look more comfortable, a little bit more mobile. And he still has arm talent. Like the arm strength has not
Mm.
gone, which I think is where you want to start here, because I think that was an issue certainly with Roethlisberger near the end. Aaron Rodgers can still make difficult throws. He can still throw it deep outside the numbers. Obviously, that's pertinent when you have DK Metcalf as your number one
Mm.
receiver. Mentally, of course, that he still has a huge advantage because of his ability to make correct decisions, diagnose post snap movement. I think watching him last year, the things that probably concern me the most, Mike, obvious discomfort with pressure. Sometimes that doesn't show up in the numbers, by the way, because he would throw it like so quickly or like there, he was just wasn't, there's a clear like aversion to being touched, making play. One thing that I thought was really notable was how, and there's a litany of reasons for this, how bad he was against the blitz. Ended up finishing 30th in QBR against the blitz. That's down from even his bad year, his final year in Green Bay, he was bad. But even that year, he was not that bad against the blitz. He was ranked 18th. And then before that, he was awesome. It was always like a superpower of his. There's a number of reasons for that. Some of it has to do with miscommunications with receivers, even though like, he had Devontae by that point. Some of it, but it was something I remember watching defenses clearly picked up on, right, as the year went on and started sending pressure, knowing that he wasn't able to dice him up the way he used to.
No, and so now you transpose that into a Steelers offense where, and I know so much of the focus towards the end of when would Rodgers sign was predicated on, hey, time under task with some of the new receiving core that's turned it over, which, listen, giving your receiving room to DK Metcalf over George Pickens at this point after that trade, definitely an upgrade. Like, I know Pickens was incredibly talented, but it was also really mercurial, on the field and off in terms of how consistent you could count on that production. But you're still going to need that time there. And then, the offensive line, we all talk about it, feels like it should be improved, right? Like Zach Frazier showed us a bunch last year. You get Troy Fautanu, your first round pick back, but the Broderick Jones over on the left side question still looms really large for a guy that just hasn't lived up to the billing since he's been drafted there. And even if you trust the talented guys, that is a position group that requires a bunch of time together and continuity in order to see the best fruits of that born. And none of that's really on their side for a quarterback that, like you said, it's very eerily similar to the Tyler Shuck conversation we had for the rookies coming out, where, to your point, it may not show up, but man, you see it all over there. So yeah, I'm with you. There's just a lot of variables in this that don't necessarily seem like a high ceiling team.
The offensive line, I think, is going to be kind of the thing on which this whole thing swings, right? Yep. The interior is really good. Really, they've obviously done a great job of drafting and developing players. Broderick Jones, I think Greg picked him as the X Factor for we did the X Factors pod. I'm almost 99% sure he picked, because it really, Dan Moore Jr., I know Steelers fans didn't love him, but he was average. He was like a competent left tackle. There's a reason why the Titans paid him. This is it, I feel like, for Jones, who's playing on the right side, and for me, Mike, like, as we talk about or ponder kind of the blending of whatever Arthur Smith wants to do with what Aaron Rodgers wants to do, blending, either way, for whatever this offense looks like to have any success, they have to be able to run the football better than they have. We know that that's what Arthur Smith wants to do. He wants to build a play action pass attack off of the zone running game, put tight ends on the field, a strength of theirs, much more so than the receiving group. And it's also what Aaron Rodgers needs. Like, at this point in his career, he needs that run game to support him. They drafted Caleb Johnson, who I thought was a good fit for Arthur Smith's offense. Like, do you think this team is going to be better at running the football? And do you think it matters as much as I do?
Yes. Completely. Like, everything we talked about in the passing attack can be at least moderately assuaged if all of a sudden you can lean on this group up front in a way that matters. And I think Caleb Johnson was one of the most, like, uniquely, like, oh, of course he's a Steeler. Yeah. Like, everything about the big running back that already wore the same colors felt you, and he's a guy that fits well into what you talked about there. Like, I thought he was a really competent zone runner from the gun, especially, which is like really hard angles to navigate and all these things. So I thought that worked as a fit. Jaylen Warren obviously was, great and much more efficient in a lot of ways than Najee was when he was there in that backfield tandem. And so, but yeah, you're right. Like, all of this is just window dressing for, if the O-line can't figure its stuff out and they can't run the football, I think everyone involved is going to have a pretty bad time.
So all told, the optimistic case, you can make the optimistic case. I know we started off by saying, it feels like they're treading water, maybe a little bit better. Yet again, they're going to be in a position where they're not, like, super equipped to go after quarterback. They're going to be a little bit too good to be picking near the top of the draft. So I feel like if you're a Steelers fan, your optimistic case is not for collapse. It's for getting to the same place you got to last year, but with a quarterback who still has the ability to hit peaks. You saw that at times last season that Russell Wilson and Justin Fields weren't capable of. It's not crazy. But I guess what I'm saying is you really have to hit that peak. Like, I don't think you're going to get 17 games in a deep playoff run of consistent high-end quarterback play from Aaron Rodgers at this point. But again, if you get a few quarters here and there in key moments supported by a good run game and a dominant defense, this is a playoff team with the ability to actually win playoff games. Is that fair?
Yes, that is fair, provided, the rest of the team, especially defensively, the key parts that are getting older, like the TJ Watt
Yeah.
conversation is at least part because he's on the wrong side of 30. We know Cam Hayward, who's been a stalwart there, is a guy that is very long in the tooth at this point. But I think the other part of that, and to your point initially about, hey, Steelers fans point out we've got capital, we can do something. Basically, the through line you're trying to hit here is Aaron Rodgers peaks at the right times for a year and maybe a few things break our way. And then we have a quarterback class that is 2024 quarterback class deep that we might be able to sneak into the back end of and then hope the Mike Tomlin of it all works. Like you can see how on both sides, you're not really satisfying one master all that well as you try and sort of hit both.
Yeah, the idea of both those things happening feels a little unlikely.
Right.
I think we're Steelers fans where it's gonna get tricky is if they do feel 9-80 as 9-80-ish as the season's coming to a close and it's like, okay, we can't compete with the Ravens and the Bengals of the world. I mean, if I'm a Steelers fan at that point, I'm saying throw Howard out there. F it. Like this is what are we doing here? But again, if you're listening to this as a Steelers fan, you're upset. It's a 1-year deal, right? Like so, this is not you're not mortgaging your future, and it's not. And I am sympathetic to the argument they didn't have good options this season. Still think they should have tried to get Geno Smith, but I by and large, this was not a good quarterbacks draft. We all agree. They obviously weren't in position to draft Cam Ward. So
yeah,
it is what it is.
maybe that's your sell is you are able to maintain your dignity as a franchise in a way few aren't. Like I know Dominique talks about this all the time, like building culture around losing squads is really hard. And so the fact that you've got that piece that's so unattainable for most sewn up and you just sort of bypassed the bad quarterback year. Like everyone seemed to have been structuring their offseason to get through this year, get through this class and try and see what next year holds.
Who's your first winner?
My first winner, I will go in the, I guess in the interest of this is sort of like a backhanded commentary, just looping in like the Bill Belichick stuff, but I went Mike Vrabel. Like in a lot of ways, I think Vrabel, seeing the situation that was left in Tennessee after that and the decision they made that was largely panned by pundits to go away from him to now end up in a place where you've got a ton of institutional knowledge. You've been handed the most talented quarterback that you've ever had as a head coach in terms of the guy that you're going to have as a day one starter who outperformed last season in adverse circumstances, largely nailed the offseason in terms of you had a lot of needs to refill. You prioritized the guys in front, especially with your top pick in Will Campbell to try and protect Drake May. Receiver is going to be a work in progress, but in general, you attacked your problems with volume. And to me, the expectations still feel low relative to someone like Caleb Williams, who was expected in Chicago year one last year by so many to be a playoff team. Now with Ben Johnson there is going to get all this renewed conversation of them being a sexy dark horse. And we're going to sort of largely leave New England alone. And then the cherry on top of that is Bill Belichick has descended into chaos. He has taken all of the palace intrigue with him to Chapel Hill while people gawk at that who used to watch him in New England. And so it kind of just has let Mike Vrabel go about his offseason business largely undisturbed by that media, at least to my knowledge.
Yeah, he couldn't have timed his return any better, I think, right? I haven't looked at Coach of the Year odds. I'll do my award prediction pod. I think, but yeah, by the way, Ben Solak and I did it last year, and we both had Kevin O'Connell as our prediction for Coach of the Year. I have to think. I haven't thought this through, but Vrabel is certainly going to be on my short list of most likely winners.
So just checking right now, Vrabel is the second best odds for Coach of the Year behind Ben Johnson.
Yeah. So, right. Yeah, that'll be a fun one to think through and debate. But I think you nailed it. Like the expectation, it's a perfect like blend of a low bar to clear in terms of improvement with heavy investment in pieces that I think we all agree should lead to some improvement and like a super talented young quarterback, competent coaching staff. I was on NFL Live with Field Yates and we talked about Drake May and Josh McDaniels and the marriage and the things that he's good at and whether the players they've added enough. And Field made a really excellent point. Last year, I've talked about this. Drake May had these like unbelievably efficient rushing numbers. Like
Mm-hmm.
he was pound for pound one of the best rushing quarterbacks in the NFL per most advanced metrics. But Field pointed out it was almost all scrambles, right? Like they weren't giving him a lot of designed runs, which is crazy, right? It's like he should like that should be a huge part of their offense. And I went back and watched some of Cam Newton's designed runs when Josh McDaniels was
I
his play
was
caller.
I
And
was
it's gonna
just thinking like late McDaniels tenure where he got to bust out a little bit of that with Cam, and they're like in no way the same kind of runner. Like we talk about
yeah,
quarterback runners and what they're capable of all the time. Like Josh Allen's really the
Josh
only
Allen.
NFL Cam Newton comp in terms of size and battering ram ability, but a
Race
guy that
close,
can scare
dude.
the edge
Race
like that,
close,
yeah.
size-wise. He's a big dude.
Oh yeah, he's a big dude, and like again, you go all the way back to like the college tape and that North Carolina offense going back to Sam Howell and then through him, like put those guys in position a lot to do it, and Sam Howell stepped up to the plate for sure.
But sort of just go back to this idea of like coaching mistakes and things that were like, again, his whole staff competence is going to be so welcomed. We know, again, this is talked about ad nauseum, what a brilliant strategist uh, Mike Vrabel is, but like the aggression I think is going to bring to the table on in-game decision making, like I feel like he gets to be like the next guy, and he picked. It's always hard to follow Bill Belichick. To follow the guy, the regime that struggled post Bill Belichick at a moment when, as you said, nobody wants Bill Belichick in the NFL. It's pretty smooth landing for Mike, who we already believe and agree is one of the best coaches in the league.
And for me, this
Better,
one
I would
is kind of like the other side of the coin of, to your point, the investment. Like if you're Drake May, you have got to feel like the belle of the ball. Like this franchise took a hard look at itself. We all, there were a lot of mixed feelings on the Gerard Mayo firing, the way that that was handled, but I still look at it as the organization realized exactly what it had at quarterback and decided it was going to do whatever it took to preserve his future, because we just talked about it in Pittsburgh. Sticking the dismount after an all-timer is one of the hardest things in sports to do. And the Patriots have also had to kind of wander in that wasteland between without what happened, the Mac Jones failed experiment after his rookie year. And so now that they've got it again and they really felt like they had to rose the boom through concrete last year, all of this just screams an organization that understands the opportunity that it has. And so conversely now for Mike Vrabel, you're walking into what feels like the healthiest attempt at a next step for New England post Brady and Belichick.
If you had, so I'm going to do the AFC East preview. We talk at length about the Patriots and the pieces. And in the coming weeks, I'm also going to do top 10 offenses and defenses, which, spoiler alert, I'm not going to have the Patriots in either. But I am optimistic about the direction things are going in. If you had to pick the one thing that keeps you up at night as a Patriots fan right now, because it's right now, it's all sunshine and roses. You got Vrabel, this feeling of competence. You're investing in the right pieces. Cardi B is at practice.
Yeah. Which but I mean, that's probably like leads you to the thing you're still worried about, which is for all the talk about investment in the offensive line. That's not perfect, right? Garrett Bradbury coming over at center, Cole Strange, a year removed now from injury for him. Yeah, Will Campbell, I do think can play tackle in the NFL, and I do think was the right decision at that spot here. But you look out at wide receiver and like, again, the things you're banking on happening here of Matt Collins and Stephon Diggs a year removed from injury with all this in the background being the differentiators and the guys to get open for him in this offense is a somewhat daunting bet in year two.
Drake May, to me, can survive with not great offensive line play, but another year of bad offensive line play is when I start to get really worried, because then you're coming off of his offensive line was the worst in the NFL last year, faced the highest quick pressure rate in football. I really feel comfortable calling them the worst in the league. It was like a jailbreak. His final year at UNC, he played behind a terrible offensive line. So then you start to worry about, okay, you've got consecutive years, you tack on another year, development being impacted by that. And I think at times you saw that last year, like correctly, he was very skittish in the pocket. And you need part of the significance of these young quarterbacks playing behind good offensive lines is it helps them develop good habits, trust.
Yeah.
And you start worrying like, okay, if this particular position group hasn't turned around, what is it going to do to our young quarterback? That would be the thing that keeps me up at night, is just much more so, I would say, than even the group of pass catchers, is just the offensive line.
Yep, especially for a guy who a lot of the conversation about him coming out was incredibly talented, live arm, makes all the throws, mobile enough, maybe some footwork things that you want to clean up, and it's really hard to do that when you don't feel like you can plant your feet and stand on solid ground back there.
All right, my next winner it's a little bit dark in a way, because he is winning because someone else is losing, and that's Daniel Jones. The Colts are having one of the, along with the Browns, true quarterback competitions in the NFL this summer. Like a legit, maybe if you had asked me like around the time they signed Jones, I would have said, well, I think Richardson probably still has a leg up, just being there in the draft, pick they invested in him and whatnot. But they gave Daniel Jones $14 million. And the way they've talked about it from the beginning has been like, this is a competition. And, I said at the time, I thought this is a good bar for Richardson to clear. If he can't clear it, right? Well, unfortunately, that competition, or his ability to try to clear it, has been set back because news broke last week that Richardson, I want to make sure I have this correctly, suffered a shoulder soreness. And I'm being careful here because this is the same shoulder. It's an aggravation of his AC joint that he sprained in his rookie season that led him to missing most of his rookie season. So he's had other injuries, he's had concussions and whatnot. This is a recurring injury, and they've said it'll probably keep him out until the beginning of training camp, but they've even been a little bit murky about that. Like, when is he coming back? I think this is disastrous for him because, Mike, like, to my eye, like for Richardson, he didn't just have to win the job in like a single preseason game, week 1 or whatever. He had to kind of win the summer, I felt like. And I'm not saying it's over, obviously. Maybe he comes back beginning of training camp. Maybe it's just like a precautionary thing. But this feels like suddenly where I was like, maybe it's like 55 Richardson, 45 Jones. Now I'm flipping it where it's like, okay, now it feels like 65 Jones, 35 Richardson.
Yeah, I mean, especially for a player who his entire, like, this is the microcosm of his entire tenure in Indianapolis, where young, underdeveloped player who desperately needs reps cannot get them because his body is constantly failing him. And for a guy who also is the hallmark of his game right now is athleticism and physicality. And so if that's the best thing you do, but it's also one of the things that's at least in part contributing to the injuries that keep taking you off the field. And oh, by the way, there's the soft skill stuff from last year, right? Like the pulling himself out of the game fiasco, getting benched briefly because of that, all of that goodwill, the trust gained in drops, lost in buckets with the rest of your team that you've got a lead that you lose out in this. Yeah, I just think this feels like the beginning of the end, and just another reminder that unfortunately we never got to see Anthony Richardson on the field long enough, consistently enough to explore what these skills could have looked like in an offense that we always felt was built very well for him.
So let's say Daniel Jones wins the job. Can this offense be good, competent? What will it look like? Because we saw what it looked like with Shane Steichen and other backup quarterbacks, Gardner Minshew being sort of the primary one. Gardner Minshew did not play well, but they were still able to move the ball to some degree. I mean, they were knocking on the door of the playoffs. When I think about Daniel Jones and how to optimize him and what the offense might look like, my mind immediately goes to 2022, which was his best season as a pro, the year that earned him the $40 million year. I guess $80 million is what he left New York with, right? Because he got to half of that. So for those who have forgotten, it was an extremely dink and dunk, zone read heavy offense, very robust. This is probably why they brought him in. There's a lot of similar. Him and Richardson are different runners, but they're both very good runners. But when Richardson went off the field and they would bring in Flacco, you really saw the impact on the run game with Jonathan Taylor when they didn't have a quarterback who was a threat to keep. You don't have that problem with Daniel Jones. He is a good runner. Zone read is a legitimate threat that defenses have to account for. I think what's just going to be kind of jarring is that year, Daniel Jones averaged 6 air yards per attempt. So the lowest average depth of target of any starting quarterback in football. Anthony Richardson had more than twice that last season. The difference between an average depth of target between Anthony Richardson, who is 11.4, and number 2, who was Trevor Lawrence, was as big as the difference between Trevor Lawrence and number 33, Jared Goff.
Dear God.
So going from that to what we last saw from, it's going to be like a radical reimagining of what this offense looks like.
But also, like, from a personnel standpoint, we do have to remember what the limitations of that season and that era of Giants football were, where until last year when they got Malik Neighbors, there was nothing that could, like, again, Alec Pierce is imperfect, but he is a guy that stretched the field and gave them plenty of those opportunities. You know, Josh Down, Michael Pittman, like, he's got more in terms of weaponry in that receiver room than he had until last year in New York, where the Malik Neighbors of it all certainly changed the math enough to matter.
So in some ways, you could also argue that the receiving room works better with an offense that's a little bit more efficient working underneath. Yes, Alec Pierce is a deep threat, but outside of him, Pittman's an intermediate guy. Josh Downs, you can do kind of a little bit of everything with. They brought Daniel Jones in to say, like, here's a guy who can run the football, so we don't have to lose that, who can at least be accurate throwing underneath. And that's, of course, been sort of Anthony Richardson's biggest failing. I think you make a great point about him having a deep option, but it's probably going to be less wow and hopefully a little bit more just efficient. If I'm a Colts fan, that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I hope they just take the governor off him as a runner. Like, you know, really over-index on that, lean all the way into it. You know, I don't know. They clearly have a type in that quarter room, right? Like, it's quarterback room, right? Like, it's no coincidence they drafted Riley Leonard out of Notre Dame, who's basically just in that same mold of incredible Clydesdale of a human being that's going to give us more as a runner than a passer right now early on.
I forgot about Riley Leonard.
Yeah, my sweet boy.
Okay, who's your next winner?
My next winner, and it feels like a bit of a cop-out saying this because the good teams in every offseason have such a lower threshold to meet, but I do think for a team in the Baltimore Ravens, who I have as the next big winner of the offseason, who are trying to take that next step in this iteration of John Harbaugh's squad with Lamar Jackson and get to a Super Bowl, had some of the biggest wins of the offseason, notably like in free agency, them getting Ronnie Stanley back in a Ravens uniform to this year, was paramount. Like, yeah, you lose Pat McCarry. That's going to be something they have to account for, and they're kind of working through with who's in the left guard spot now. But Ronnie's back. Like, I didn't know we'd get this, like, all borderline all-pro version of Ronnie Stanley again after the ankle injury. And last year, he was that guy. And so you had to replace some parts last year on the O-line. You got it stable by the end of the season. So you pair that with re-signing Derrick Henry, re-signing Rashad Bateman, drafting Malachi Starks on the back end that sort of codifies what we saw work at the end of the year when the Ravens defense was able to flip the script. And all of a sudden you say, for a contender relative to Kansas City, Buffalo, these other teams that we're going to talk about in their tax bracket, it really feels like they hit this out of the park.
Yeah, there's not I talked about the Patriots. What keeps you up at night? The Ravens there's not a lot that keeps you up at night. This is still an unbelievably good football team. The defense is essentially running it back. Talked a lot about the Stanley deal. Bateman deal, I don't think, that happened last week. Super reasonable deal with a guy who was really efficient last season. Important, actually, is the word I'm looking for. He has such a distinct role in this Ravens offense. He's their X receiver. I mentioned this stat on NFL Live. Rashad Bateman had 32 targets where he was the isolated receiver. No one else on the Ravens had more than 5. He is the guy who they line up out. Zay Flowers is the offense flows through him, and they move him around and they do motions with him, and he wins it, in different ways. But Rashad Bateman is the traditional X receiver in this offense. I thought that was a really team friendly deal that they signed with him, to be honest. And one more thing, little reveal, I have an interview coming out with Marlon Humphrey in a couple weeks, who was Ravens fans. You're not going to want to miss this. He was amazing. And I asked him for two most underrated receivers in the NFL. One answer I'm not going to spoil because it's so funny. The other one, though, was Rashad Bateman. He was like, Rashad Bateman, I'm telling you, in practice, looks unbelievable. So
and honestly, think about what he represents. This was the one position group that people really pointed to at the Ravens were in the draft, and they had acknowledged it. Like, we had difficulty finding and evaluating talent at that position, and now you've re-signed a guy that was your first round pick before, and Zay Flowers has been an unmitigated success in there. So they've been able to really attack the one position group that had kind of given them trouble in recent history in terms of finding it on their own.
I think if there's one thing you worry a little bit about, it's just secondary. Ardarius Washington tore his Achilles, really slept on in terms of his impact last year and what that means. Made the Malachi Starks draft pick more of a necessity than like a luxury. I would not mind them making a run at Jair Alexander. You got Marlon Humphrey, who plays in the slot. Nate Wiggins was really good last year. We talked about Awuzie maybe potentially being sneaky significant for them as a CB2. Jair Alexander on a 1-year prove-it deal. Wouldn't hate that. At all.
Jair Alexander, while a bit of a setback here is going to have, because I saw Solak tweeting about the Bills should go after him. Like, he's going to be that easy guy where all the consensus contenders who need a little bit of cornerback help are going to try and throw money at in a 1 year and see if he can ride it to a ring.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a lot of money for him. I don't. I think it's because of the injuries, and I think it is going to be a playoff team. All right, my next winner, and we'll take a break after this, is all of the quarterbacks in the NFC North, because they're all in unbelievable positions in terms of the talent around them, coaching. Let's start here. How would you rank their situations? So we're talking about Jordan Love, JJ McCarthy, Jared Goff. I'm putting you on the spot. I didn't warn you about this, but I think it's a good exercise because it makes you realize how good they all have it. Like, the NFC North, honestly, is like a neighborhood where like everybody lives in a mansion.
Yes.
I mean, no, I feel no pity for it. We talked about Drake May and the Pats, the offensive line. I mean, top to bottom, these rosters are so stacked. There's little nits you can pick on, I think, all of the offenses. But this is it's tough. I have mine.
Okay. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to give mine?
You go first.
Okay. I would say you're right. This is a division that was so good last year. They thought about trying to break the playoff seeding mold in changing the rule. But I would say, to your point, in terms of what I'd prioritize, I would say, to me, the number one situation, and it's close, would be Minnesota.
Yeah.
Okay. Just because you retain your primary play caller in addition to all of the other weapons on that offense, the way they addressed interior offensive line this offseason, the guys they signed and drafted. I would put Detroit right behind them just because, again, I love the weapons around there. Jared Goff, the Tate Ratledge Pickett offensive line looks really prescient right now, as they're going to have to do a little bit more with that group. But coaching outside of Ben Johnson leaving is similar, but Ben Johnson is important. And then I would go Packers and I would go Bears last.
I'm so torn between the Packers and the Bears. I wrote down like the depth charts, and I'm just looking at them. I think I'm going to give a slight edge to the Packers because of the continuity there with your coaching staff. And one of those coaches might come up later, by the way, when we do a little head coach draft action, future head coach draft. But like, weapons wise, DJ Moore, Adunze, Luther Burden, Zacchaeus, Colson Loveland, Cole Kmet, Swift and Johnson, inferior run game, offensive line. There's some offensive line turnover with the Packers. They seem to never have problems. I think I'm going to agree with you. It's very close. I think and then with the Lions, so my order is the same.
Okay.
But it's so close. It's so close. I mean, because I think the Bears also, it's a new interior offensive line. So the Bears on paper, I think you could argue, are actually better than the Packers.
Right.
situationally, but it all has to come together. With the Packers, we have more proof of concept. With the Lions, yeah, I do worry about the interior of the offensive line and the new play caller. So I actually think it's Minnesota with a bullet. That if I have a difference from you, I don't think it's particularly close. I think Minnesota, you could argue, is best situation for any quarterback in the entire NFL at this point. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I listened to the podcast that you and Kevin Clark did talking about coaches in the NFL and ranking all of them. And Kevin O'Connell is just a guy that, like, again.
Yeah.
All you have to really point to, all the other wonderful things about him interpersonally, schematically, like Sam Darnold last year, like what he did, and the fact that we all saw it and said, oh yeah, well, if you're going to get the best out of Sam Darnold, it's probably going to be here with him, is freaking incredible. And so JJ McCarthy, like, of the young quarterbacks that we've all discussed, like, overwhelmingly, like, what a dream situation for that dude.
Keys to the Lamborghini for sure. So I've talked about the Packers receivers, and I talked about Matthew Golden and his importance and how they had the highest drop rate in football last year. They dropped 6.3% of their catches. So to put that in perspective, average teams are usually like, above 3%. Packers had twice as much. What percent do you think Lions pass catchers dropped?
Oh God. I mean, it's got to be at or near the lowest rate in the NFL, right?
It is the lowest.
Yep.
It's 0.8%.
Jesus.
Less than 1%. I was talking about Ladd McConkey and how he caught everything. Over 10 yards, Ladd McConkey had the second highest catch rate in football last year. Amon-Ra St. Brown caught 75% of his passes over, and this is different from drops because some numbers are, if it's an accurate pass, it's not charted. And it wasn't like it was like his average at the target was like a lot lower than everybody else. It was about, it was about on par. But yeah, I mean, that dude is a quarterback's best friend. He remains, even to this day, like he's still like a little bit underrated, I feel. But I think as concerned as I am about the play caller and my point is the interior of the offensive line, the weapons are just too good. And it's the same. They brought back Tim Patrick. They added Isaac Tesla. They're deep. That's the other thing, right? This is the deep group of pass catchers that's still unbelievably multiple. So yeah, I think that's fair. Some of these offenses will definitely, it's funny. I think the Minnesota Vikings are the one I really have to think about for top 10 offenses because, like I said, it's JJ McCarthy getting the keys to the Ferrari. I changed it from a Lamborghini to a Ferrari. But like, it's a guy who's never driven.
It's a guy who's never driven, but it kind of to the point you made, and I was thinking about this more as we were talking about his upbringing for a year, even while injured in this healthy environment where he's going to have all these things. And the good habits thing, like that goes back to Michigan. Like the whole difficulty in scouting this guy was he had such an armored tank around him there, but he had great coaching in Jim Harbaugh. He had an offensive line that allowed him to develop a bunch of healthy habits that he's going to walk into this with. So it's not a guy that you're coming in necessarily having to like break the same way we talk about with Caleb Williams, how there are some things you're going to need to curtail and corral in Caleb Williams' game if he is going to reach his peak. Like you're dealing, from a different direction talent wise, but you're not having to break a bunch of bad habits, even if he hasn't stepped foot on the field yet.
All right. Tell us what you think about our rankings. Again, this is situations. It's not about the quarterback play. Let's take a quick break, come back, and get to our remaining winners and then the future head coach draft. All right, we're back. Who is your next winner, Mike Golic Jr.?
Next winner, and this, I like both of my last two, you're going to tell I'm such a sports talk gas bag, and I fall back on these things that are like, very, very much a little more lowbrow than the usual Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny fodder, but I could not ignore as we look through these, like running backs. I have to give the win to the position for the offseason that they had. This is not a running backs matter conversation. Please don't change the dial. We're not going to do any of that. But it's acknowledging that after a season where we saw, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs all go to these new places, and certainly the latter two have infinitely more success, especially when you look at a lot of the more meaningful statistics than Josh Jacobs did in Green Bay. But then to follow that up and see these teams comfortable again saying, we are going to reward a weapon in our offense that we use in this way at a time where rushing attacks have found an advantage again against defenses that have gotten pretty light. You saw that reflected in the draft where we had 2 running backs drafted in the first round again. So it was just, I think, a reminder that we're finding our level again in that conversation, where it's certainly not every running back is going to get paid right now. If you're James Cook, you're probably going to find that out the hard way with Buffalo in terms of what that looks like.
Are they? You think you will?
Yeah, you had a draft where we had, an infinite amount of running backs in the top 100 players we talked about. That's kind of a reminder that you've got a volume problem in terms of the top end guys being paid. But overall, I thought you saw this come to a healthy balance of teams realizing if we've got a good offensive line, God forbid we have a mobile quarterback, then we can afford to spend richly in this area for guys that certainly afford us a unique way to attack opposing defenses.
Yeah, I think in terms of like, will we see value come down? So, you're, as you expressed it, value this offseason was reflected in a couple of contracts given out, Barkley and Henry getting extensions, 2 guys being taken in the first round. And I think that reflects 2 things: the talent of those 4 players in particular, the situation. Well, actually, less so the situations, because it's not like Ashton Genty's walking into this like running back stream. We're actually going to talk about that offense in a second, though. But I think a lot of it is motivated by the efficiency of the run game at the moment, which, of course, and we've talked about this a lot, is in response to the cyclical nature of defensive roster construction. Basically, defenses going lighter and faster, suddenly running the ball is more efficient because of the way defenses are. It also has to do with the way defenses are playing quarterbacks, all of that. I think if you see those efficiency numbers, I'll be interested in seeing if you see those efficiency numbers start to drop down again, then suddenly it's like, okay, are we once again devaluing this position and maybe valuing? It's not like receivers are being valued less, by the way. Yep. It's just that, yeah. But I think it is going to be interesting to see how that plays out this year for sure. Is it just a few special guys, or is it, more of a league-wide thing?
Yeah, I do think it is. But I think that's part of the healthy part of this, I guess, is it's an acknowledgement that, like, because we had seen, as we had looked at salaries increasing over time, like with inflation through the league, that running back had sort of lagged behind everyone else. And so now for a couple of these guys to at least, break through or approach, Christian McCaffrey kind of put him in an unrealistic position for a while for everyone else, I just thought was like a nice, healthy market reset in a way that made sense.
Can we talk about James Cook for a second? Because you nodded to that, or you alluded to that. You think they're not going to pay him?
Oh, no, I mean, I think they're going to pay him, but it's not going to look like those deals. And I feel like that might be how he sees himself, despite the fact that, like, volume-wise, he's nowhere near those guys, which, quite frankly, is a win for Buffalo if it's a loss for him. I know Philly, there's some fear about the amount of touches Saquon had last year and how that traditionally transfers year to year. But James Cook just, quite frankly, does not play enough snaps in an offense where Josh Allen is still the most important person in that backfield, and they have a great offensive line to say we absolutely need to pay this guy whatever he wants.
Yeah, but then you could say that about the Eagles and the Ravens, right? They have good offensive lines, great rushing quarterbacks. Did they need to pay their 2 backs?
I mean, I think
I'm not playing James Cook's agent here. I'm just kind of like, it's an interesting. I asked because I think one of my big takeaways of I'm not saying this should necessarily translate into a value thing, by the way, or whatnot, but I was so impressed by James Cook last year. I thought I think he has developed a lot as a player in ways that I found really interesting. Like, comparing him last year to early in his career, I think his vision as a runner, his ability to pick up yards after contact has really, his hands also really impressed me. And I think he also creates above and beyond what the offense is like. We talk about great situations for quarterbacks. Like you said, the offense is a great situation for a running back. But candidly, when you saw other backs in there, I thought, it was part of a committee, which certainly will affect the value perspective. There's a difference. And I was just pulling up, rush yards over expected. I mean, he was right up there in the top That's the NGS stat that looks
Yep.
at how much is a running back doing relative to the blocking or the positioning of the defenders. Henry and Barkley are 1 and 2, but James Cook is 6 right there. Yeah, I don't know. That's gonna be an interesting one because I do think you can kind of see both sides of it.
A big feather in his cap is something you mentioned, and I thought one of the earliest markers of the difference between the Joe Brady and Ken Dorsey offenses was James Cook's hands out of the backfield and him in the
Yeah,
passing attack as a part of that offense.
100%. All right. I just tease this. Let's do this one now. I have Chip Kelly.
Mm.
I want to talk about the Raiders offense with you and you in particular because I think it was maybe when I was watching Zach Charbonnet, or maybe it was before Chip Kelly got hired by Ohio State. And I don't know if you and I were talking about Chip Kelly just as a play caller and whether or not the NFL might take another look at it. But you were the person, you watch a lot more college football than me. You were the person who's like, no, he's really changed and evolved his run game in particular, but just generally as a play caller. And then you really saw that at Ohio State. I think Chip Kelly with this Raiders offense is so he's a winner because I think he is for a few reasons. Chip Kelly. One, he's making $1 zillion. Two, I think this is his opportunity to show the NFL how much he has grown as a play caller from his last, which was so long ago, right? At this point, his last stint in the NFL when it was all gas, no brakes, spread him out. Defenses wised up to it. Completely different. We can get into that from what we saw in college. I also like the players he has at his disposal. I think that it's not a perfect group. Everybody knows how I feel about Geno Smith, but I'm looking at this group of weapons and I think about what he did in college. And I believe there's a capacity here to do something really interesting with this Raiders offense. So a lot of reasons why I'm excited to watch this.
Completely agree. Like a lot of this is rooted in, and I know you and I are both Geno Smith fans, think that he's a quarterback that walking into that situation with him as your quarterback is certainly a big win. But yes, I think at times as someone that covers both, I underrate just how little overlap for some people there is between where they'll watch in college and if they're, largely NFL fans. And for the people that did leave Chip Kelly, especially because the UCLA years didn't, afford you as much high-end success, obviously, as the Ohio State tenure is. And I remember talking to him about this when he went to UCLA because we associated Chip Kelly with the purest form of the spread, hurry up, no huddle offense. It was about engineering these advantages in sports science off the field that have sort of become ubiquitous now. And then he got to UCLA and he's like, I looked around and what I had available to me and what the recruiting grounds gave me were a lot of really quality tight ends and running backs to go along with, he had a long tenure with Dorian Thompson-Robinson at quarterback, who was an incredible college quarterback and what he afforded you athletically. And so it changed the way he approached a run game that went from that spread no huddle stuff to a lot more man blocking schemes, a lot more misdirection, that use of 12 personnel that allows you the flexibility that we always talk about in football with that personnel group. And so, he changed so much as a play caller in the things he threw at opposing defenses. And this last year, you can point to all the great weapons he had on offense, but he also schemed those guys and Will Howard into a lot of really wide open throws against, go look at the national championship game. Al Golden against Chip Kelly, like NFL level coordinators going toe to toe. And he pulled Al's pants down a couple of times. Like it was really tough. So I just think with the weapons he's got to the tight end room, especially, it's really interesting.
But that's it. All the things you're describing that he did at Ohio State, they map on well to this group. There's no Jeremiah Smith type, but Brock Bowers and Mike Mayer, have potential to be one of the top 3 tight end duos in the league. I really believe that. Obviously, Bowers is the main dude at this point. You got Genty and Raheem Mostert. Jacoby Myers, Jack Besh, Trey Tucker. Trey Tucker's the speed guy, but Myers and Besh can do they can work over the middle of the field. They're both kind of gritty, they can do the dirty work. They can, Besh can block. I think this to me, and then you have a quarterback who is, you don't have to baby.
Yes.
you talk about, I think this is a much better situation it's funny because the Seahawks had better receivers, but I actually think the offensive infrastructure here is so much more favorable for Geno Smith than what he was dealing with last year in Seattle, if the offensive line can just be average. I think that has the potential to not only be really interesting and really creative, and again, with Kelly, you alluded to this, the use of different formations and personnel groupings and motions, all, we expect to see a lot of as well. But I think they're going in the direction, you talked about running backs, they're going in the direction that sort of the league is going in right now offensively, where it is, hey, let's get bigger dudes on the field. Let's run the football. Let's use our personnel groupings to dictate to defenses in interesting ways. Let's get our tight ends. So I just think, I don't know. I feel, I don't know if they'll make my top 10, but I'm pretty optimistic about this Raiders offense. That's all I'm saying.
It's going to be fun. If nothing else, I'm excited to watch. The biggest difference we talked about Geno and all the positives. The one thing that he represents that Chip, I guess the last year at UCLA dealt with somewhat, if I'm remembering right. I called a couple, like one or two of their games that year, but Geno, not a mobile quarterback, not going to afford you anything like that. Will Howard was used in specific situations, but was absolutely a plus runner in college in terms of what he afforded you there. DTR on his best days in that run game at UCLA was too. So that'll be the one thing. But again, the way that Chip just used motion and formations to try and open up gaps for his guys is going to be fun to watch with that group, especially Ashton, who, to your point about helping an offensive line, is one of the few running backs that is legitimately like a tackle breaking vision, asset, and value add to his offensive line.
Geno Smith's a great play action quarterback. Loves throwing over the middle of the field, deep middle of the field, tight windows. He's really good at throwing to tight ends too. You saw that in Seattle, whose tight ends were definitely inferior to what he's working with now in Vegas. So yeah, I don't know. Raiders fans are less optimistic than me about the Raiders, which never happens. Like almost always fans are more optimistic than you as an opinionator. And I'm like having to convince all these Raiders fans in my life that they're going to be fun to watch. So
it's very, I think it's just all like quarterback and coordinator and how much of each you've consumed and what your thoughts have been on them. Because again, I think both of them, depending on your level of familiarity, could be viewed a lot differently.
All right, I want to give this the time it deserves. So let's start our future head coach draft right now. So some ground rules. We're picking coordinators or whoever, just not current head coaches. And we're picking them not only evaluating the likelihood that they're going to be chosen to be head coach, but also we believe in them. And it's really hard because so much of whether head coach succeeds depends on where they land, obviously, the team. But these are guys we're kind of just like buying their stock, so to speak. I will go first here. Usually, my guests go first, but I have a number one draft pick. I'm going Joe Brady. Was he? Do you have a list? Is he on your?
I have list, right? I have like a general list. My one question was going to be, does this have to be among coordinators that have never been head coaches previously?
No, it can be anyone.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, because I have a few formers here, some of the older guys.
All right, so Brady off the board.
Brady's off the board. This one of my biggest L's, of which there are many, of the last few years was thinking that going from Ken Dorsey to Joe Brady wasn't going to be an upgrade because the Ken Dorsey offense was good. But Joe Brady, I think, this is kind of a continuation of what you're talking about, really saw where the NFL was going in some ways, but also, in terms of like what he has done with the run game in Buffalo, the way I think he has made the most of the players at his disposal. Yes, he gets to work with an absolute mutant quarterback, but it's not a group of world beaters at pass catcher. And he consistently finds ways, to get them open, to manipulate defenses. I think he's a very creative play caller. And I asked around a little bit about this because you remember, like, he was like one point, LSU and Carolina, he was like the guy.
Oh yeah.
And then kind of flamed out a little bit in Carolina. So I think from what I've heard, he's really like rebuilt his equity in the league. There's like a strong belief that he's like become a good leader and all of that. I don't really never know what to take stock of those things. But I'm watching that Bills offense and I understand the quarterback really helps. But if I'm a NFL franchise, I want a piece of that.
Yeah, I think to your point about the play calling too, like, and like creative use of like the personnel, like you want a coach that's going to be able to walk in, go chop style, look at the ingredients and say, what's our best way forward? And, you know, using the 6 offensive linemen more and better than anybody else in the league and just saying, all right, we know we've got this pitch in our arsenal. Let's make sure we go and put this in position to succeed as much as possible. The Josh Allen switch last year, especially when all of a sudden you're moving on at receiver in a way that now puts more of the onus on him. Yes, I definitely agree. You're right. From going from being the wonderkin and the next up to kind of settling in as just a legitimately effective coordinator is a definite feather in his cap.
Okay, who's your first pick?
My first pick. God, I'm so between two. You know what I'm going to go with? And I think part of this is valuing a little bit of the former experience. I'll take Kliff Kingsbury. I think what we saw from him last year in coming back, beating the allegations that had plagued him for a lot of his career as a coordinator, Jaden Daniels deserves a ton of credit, but I also do think going through and hearing him talk about some of the things that he's learned under Dan Quinn about deficiencies in the way that he did things as a head coach in a way that he said, I'm absolutely going to change in the future. I think all of that combined with being young and being someone tied to quarterbacks makes that incredibly valuable to me going forward.
Yeah, I think he is a guy. If he does it again this year, I think he's absolutely going to get, if not a job, at least some serious looks. And in some ways, in picking him, you're betting on the fact that he can do it again. And by do it again, I mean call another efficient offense. I believe in that. They've invested in the offense more so than the defense. I mean, you trade for Laramie Tunsil, you're adding Debo, you add depth on the offensive line as well in the draft, Connerly Jr. I mean, I just, like I the other thing about the Commanders offense, it wasn't unsustainable. I've gone back and looked at numbers and tendencies, and it wasn't like they were just getting unbelievably lucky on third down or whatnot. Like they had this has always been the case with Kliff, a really creative and dynamic run game. Expect that to persist, and a lot of that is aided by their quarterback. If there was anything that seemed unsustainable to me, it was the offensive line, which I think was kind of exposed at the end of last season.
Yep.
But they knew that. They were self-aware about it, which I've talked about. So, yeah, I think the odds of Kliff being good again are pretty great. And if he is good again, absolutely, I think.
All right, who's your next pick?
Okay, I am going to go to the other side of the ball. This might be a little bit early, but I'm going to take Jesse Minter.
Ooh, okay.
Coordinator of the LA Chargers. I think he arguably did more with less than any other defensive coordinator in football last year. I think he's the Mike Macdonald Michigan tree. I think Mike Macdonald's going to be good again. There's another coach who I think is going to be good again, and so I think Chargers are going to be very solid again. He, to me, is likely to get shine from that. I don't know if I'm going to think about the defense and how I have them ranking, and then the other thing is I think it's a defense where the coaching gets a lot of credit for it. It's not loaded with superstars. It's a creative, adaptive scheme. He made changes as the year went on that I think, to your point about offensive play, what are they doing with the pieces that they have? It's kind of the number one thing I think I'm looking for in a head coach is just adaptability. He seems normal when he talks, which goes a long way with me.
Mm-hmm.
I've only heard great things about him as a leader and a teacher. So yeah, I'm super high on him.
I mean, when you come up in your coaching tree, getting passed back and forth between the Harbaugh brothers, You're again learning all of the like intangible leadership stuff at a really high level to go along with a guy who offers you a decided schematic advantage with him at the helm of your defense. So I love that pick. He's a guy that, again, covering college football, we saw a ton of him during his time at Michigan during the national championship run. And it transferred over pretty seamlessly on a side of the ball where you're right. Like Justin Herbert and the offense were going to be such the focus and were such the failing in a lot of ways that Jesse really was able to shine in a way that was encouraging.
All right. Who's your second pick?
Well, you actually emboldened me because I had been sitting here thinking about this, and part of him is like I've known him for a while, but he also represents an archetype that's got a pretty high hit rate. I'm going to go Zach Robinson in Atlanta.
Okay, he's on my list.
It was 1 year. It's an extremely talent-filled offense. I grant you that, but what they were able to do in the run game, Bijan Robinson is special, but that is a team that just said, hey, we are going to, take our offensive line that's a veteran group with outside of one guy, maybe everyone that's like above average, only one guy that's really like in the great category at guard. But we're able to turn that into an absolute wrecking ball in that way. He is a McVay guy. So again, all the intangible stuff and team development things that you see with, him, Liam Cohen, the other guys that are branches of this tree kind of check the box there. And so I just think he's going to probably be, again, if Atlanta now this year, jettison Kirk Cousins, Michael Penix Jr. comes in and you see a big jump in year 2, I do think that's the last box to check. Like, can we get the quarterback play to be something consistently weaponized in this offense now that it's young and healthy? Then he's probably going to be a guy whose stock reflects that.
Okay, my third overall pick is gonna sound so it's a retread. So okay. I have about 1, 2, 3 retread options. And I went with this coach because I think he's a younger retread. I think he's younger, or he's younger looking maybe. And I also think his unit is going to be extremely good. That's Vance Joseph. Denver Broncos defense. I just think that I think that the Broncos defense, I love the additions that they made. I think they're going to benefit from some improvements in the offense as well. I think he will get credit for that. I think he will also be like his downfall or whatever will be in Arizona will be better understood maybe with time. The other retread, actually I should wait until the other retreads I was considering were both older, and you don't see that a lot.
Yeah.
Teams don't hire the much older retreads very often.
I'm with you. Like my next one, especially at this point, like I want to just say Spags because he has displayed a desire to be a head coach again. He's obviously got so much postseason cachet in terms of being this incredible architect of some of the best games, like all the stuff we've worn out with Spags. So I'll just couple that with desire because the other one I'm sure was Todd Monken, who is going to be at the helm of another absolute shredder of an offense this season.
So you're taking Spags over Monken, right?
Yeah, I'll take Spags just because, again, like he has been out here openly saying, I want another job. And I have a feeling eventually it's going to be too hard to ignore.
If it would be like he was waiting for Andy Reid to retire. I don't know what what Reid's timeline is like. Okay. I'm going to go here with a little bit different direction. I'm going to go with Adam Stenavich, who is the offensive coordinator of the Green Bay Packers, but is in the classic head coach, play caller, Matt LaFleur. How much credit do you give him? We have seen consistently coaches in that tree who don't call plays still get hired and have success. LaFleur himself being Stenavich is a big boy, former offensive lineman. Got his start as a strength coach, by the way, with I think the Saints. Was a former offensive line coach. He was a run game coordinator and he's the offensive coordinator. I think the fact that the Packers offensive line has had so much turnover and young guys coming in and guys playing different roles works for him. This was one too where I asked around and folks who knew about him from interviews and whatnot spoke really highly of him. So they apparently he his interviews well and has a good reputation.
I am always going to openly endorse the offensive line backgrounded jump in this. I think we got a little bit more of that talked about in the last cycle, more like the potential position coach. I think you guys in Seattle flirted with Hank Fraley, potentially a coordinator, just trying to pry, offensive line help out of Detroit. But you're right. Green Bay, and this is part of why, don't mess up. Like, give Elton Jenkins what he wants. He's been the most important versatile piece in your offensive line for a while now, that has cross-trained guys probably better than any group in the NFL, to be able to have so many guys that are physically capable, you've scouted well, but also that you can clearly coach up well enough. And very well at this level, there are not a lot of offensive line coaches at the NFL that are differentiators in terms of talent development at that position. You can point them out pretty easily across the league, and that's certainly one.
Who's your fourth pick?
Fourth pick. I'll take a flyer. His background is interesting, and I thought year one, he came in with a lot of question marks around him because of the source coming from the college side.
Oh, sorry, I misspoke. I said Vance Joseph was the Cardinals head coach. I meant to say he was the Broncos head coach.
Yeah.
And then he went to the Cardinals. Sorry.
Understood, Chef. I'll go interesting. I'll go Jeff Hafley. Like, been a head coach at the college level, came in last year and helped max out the potential on a defense that had been talked about as underachieving for a little bit. The styles came in very differently, and is a guy that's got experience at the NFL level already. That's why he came back up to that level, but also understands what it is to manage a program, albeit one that is under-resourced relative to competition in the way that Boston College is. So I'll go Hafley.
I think the contrast between him and the previous defensive coordinators really works. And they've also made some investments on that side of the ball and had good draft picks. But you kind of get like a little case study, like, oh, coaching makes a difference, right? And I think if they continue building on that, especially the end of the season, you really saw the Packers defense not letting them down in the way that they have in the past. I saw some adaptability too, by the way, talked about Boston College. He's run so much single high. What is this defense going to look like? I thought there were some really creative and interesting game plans. Not a group of world beaters on the defensive line, but still did a really good job anyways, dialing up pressure. So yeah, I was a huge fan of his. All right, my final pick. Let's do one more pick each. I'm deciding between two guys. I've gone so defense heavy. I feel like I need a hedge here, but I want to take this guy, and I don't care, even though maybe I should take another offensive guy. Wow, I have 4 out of 5 are defense. That seems dumb. Because I took Brady, Stenavich is offense. Okay. No, we're good. Sorry. 2 and 2. My bad. So yeah, Brady and Stenavich were offense. Minter and Joseph were defense. Why did I? Okay. Well, then I'm going to go defense. 3 out of 5. I'm going to take Zach Orr here, the Ravens defensive coordinator.
Yep.
Again, that Mike Macdonald tree. I thought the turnaround of the Ravens defense last season was really impressive. I think they're going to be, and I know that there was other coaches in the building there, but I think that they're going to be really good again. We talked about this. I think he's going to get a lot of credit for it. He was as the Mike Macdonald coach, when Mike left and their staff was pillaged, essentially, he was the guy that Harbaugh believed in, that they chose to be the defensive coordinator. And I think that speaks to not only, his ability, but also how he's regarded in the building, his personality. He just seems like a rising star to me and is linked with what I expect to be one of the better defenses in the NFL.
Yeah, to watch him adjust and respond in real time last year in a situation where a lot's expected of you. You don't just get to go work in the dark and hone your craft at a place where there's no stakes or nobody cares here is a really impressive testament to a bunch of the between the ears stuff that shows your ability to go and transfer that as a head coach when you're doing something for the first time again. So, and albeit when that happens, you're usually not walking into a cupboard that's as well stocked as the Baltimore defense, and there's all the continuity issues. But I think on the other side, like taking over something that seems ready-made and ready to go and was, all-time great the year before, and having to respond to that comparison is pretty tough.
All right, your final pick?
I mean, so I'm evenly split offense and defense right now. So I'm trying to decide which way to tilt this here. But I guess in that same way, like, man, I feel like Anthony Weaver got a lot of love last year. And I found out midway through last year, he's a former Notre Dame guy. Same thing, Baltimore Ravens tree. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that. Okay, sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt you. I had no idea you went to Notre Dame.
Honestly, I did not either until I saw him on LinkedIn. LinkedIn was what let me know that Anthony Weaver shared my alma mater. But no, I think walking into, again, weird situation down in Miami where so much of the focus is on Tua in the offense. Mike McDaniel, by the way, seems like he is thoroughly miserable right now. Saw him answering some questions about like the Jalen Ramsey future and what's going on with that situation.
Hot seat candidate.
I mean, it certainly seems like it at this point. He seems like a guy who's feeling and understanding that. So I'll say Anthony Weaver on the other side for a lot of the same Zach Orr reasons.
We really did the whole tree, Mentor or Weaver. Like, that's the defensive meta of the NFL right now. Okay, other guys. So to recap, can you name all the guys you chose?
Yes, I went Kliff Kingsbury, Zach Robinson, Steve Spagnuolo, Jeff Hafley, and Anthony Weaver.
It's a good group. I have Joe Brady, Jesse Minter, Vance Joseph, Adam Stenavich, and Zach Orr. Some of the other guys that I had on my list, Drew Petzing, who's the offensive coordinator in Arizona. Monken.
Yep.
Joe Witt Jr., who's the defensive coordinator with the Commanders. Bobby Babich, who's the defensive coordinator with the Buffalo Bills. I think does a really good job. Ejiro Evero, if he can turn around the Panthers defense, is someone who's gotten looks in the past. And I think people have an understanding of, we talk about guys in great situations, the one he's in. Little bit outside the box, Marcus Freeman.
Please stop. Please don't do this to me. We're so happy right now.
He also seems like he wants it because, like, when he's asked about it, I can see it in the desire in his eyes. Maybe it's just like looking at his eyes. Grant Udinski.
Me too.
Grant Udinski is a young guy who just got made the Jags offensive coordinator. Might get the Liam Cohen shine even though he looks like if Johnny Manziel's life went right. Have you looked at him?
No, wait.
If Johnny Manziel didn't do hard living, choose hard living is a better way to put that. Mike Kafka, if the Giants thing works out, although there's kind of weird pull between him and Dable and play calling and stuff. Kevin Shepard, the Lions defensive coordinator. I'm optimistic about this Lions defense, getting healthy again. And that's it. That was my list. Let me know, guys, if you think this is funny because nobody wants their offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator to get robbed. Let us know who you think maybe we left off, if there are any obvious, or maybe outside the box choices. There's always someone you don't expect. No one sees coming, it's not a written, we knew Ben Johnson, we knew Liam Cohen, but there's always a few surprises.
Yeah, they're rarely allowed to sit in one spot as long as Ben Johnson was, but you're right. The true measure of how good our lists are is how many fan bases are angry that we are outing their special boy.
Ravens fans with Mike McDonald were so funny at the end. Did you see they would be like, Mike McDonald, did you realize started the bird flu or whatever? There was a lot of really good jokes about that. All right, well, that's it for this week. Next week, I will be back with top 10 offenses. As you can tell, I'm already thinking about it, and I have not made up my mind. It's going to be a fun and tricky list. It's going to be Ben Solak joining me to do that. Mike, so where should people find the new show?
Just FanDuel Sports Network, wherever you've got it in your local markets. We're working on the podcast feed right now. We're working on the YouTube. Okay.
So they can't yet.
Yeah, they can't really yet unless you've got FanDuel Sports Network, which you should and is great for consuming all of your local sports needs.
Find Mike, of course, wherever you follow him on social media. You're on Blue Sky's Mike Golic Jr., right?
Yep.
very excellent reviews of new food products that I recommend checking out.
Selena Gomez got a new Oreo out here. Jazzed.
In the meantime, check out youtube.com/@Mina Also check out, if you are watching the show, Love Island USA, my podcast with David Dennis Jr. Viewer discretion. We are not only going to do Love Island, but right now we are doing Love Island. Please go follow. You can also watch them on YouTube. They are drop midweek. YouTube, I'm also publishing these interviews that I've been talking about. The one with Marlon Humphrey I'll let you guys know when it's out. It's not going to come out this week. In the meantime, thank you as always to my friends at Omaha Productions, Kirsten Sebecki, Anthony Jimenez, Owen Saylor, Jack Foster, and Tucker Tashjian. And I'll be back next week.